see Hillary Clinton is the nominee and making her big introduction to America Day. Sports fans, we're here at the Wells Fargo Center in Philadelphia, where the fourth and final night of the Democratic National Convention is just getting underway. In a few hours, history will be made. From the stage behind us, that is where Hillary Clinton will ascend the dais and finally, officially, and no doubt enthusiastically accept her party's nomination for President of the United States. This will be, by far, the most important speech of Hillary Clinton's political career. But compared with the last two Democratic presidents, that would be her husband and Barack Obama, Clinton is hardly considered a standout orator. Even she's open to admitting that it is a skill that does not come naturally, but she has delivered a handful of clutch performances on the campaign trail this cycle from the podium. So let's go to the tape and take a look at that.
I believe the person the Republicans have nominated for president cannot do the job. Donald Trump's ideas aren't just different, they are dangerously incoherent. They're not even really ideas, just a series of bizarre rants, personal feuds, and outright lies. If the FBI is watching you for suspected terrorist links, you shouldn't be able to just go buy a gun with no questions asked. We believe that cooperation is better than conflict, unity is better than division, empowerment is better than resentment, and bridges are better than walls.
So, Mark, we've been watching Hillary Clinton professionally for 25-odd years. We know her strengths, we know her weaknesses, we think what she's capable of. What would constitute for her a home run tonight?
George Herbert Walker Bush gave the speech of his life when he gave his acceptance speech in 1988. So it can be done. Someone who's not thought of as a great speaker giving a great one.
1,000 points of light.
Three things, kinder, gentler. Yeah. Three things I'm looking for. One is, does she give it, as in we saw in those clips, in her own voice, not in some stagey voice, in her own voice. Two, does she have a theory of the case about the economy and how to create jobs? Because that is where this election, I think, in the end, will be won or lost. And finally, does she marry up her biography with why she wants to be president, where she thinks the country wants to go?
Those are all really strong answers, and I agree with all of them. I think, if she's had testimony given to her by her husband primarily and by others. Chelsea Clinton tonight will also, I'm sure, say some things about what motivates her mother. But I think there's no examples and no explanation of motivation that is more powerful than that comes from the speaker itself. I think people want to know her heart and how her heart marries up to her agenda and her priorities. I also think she's got to really make a direct appeal to the members of the Obama coalition. She needs all those people, not just the percentages, but the raw numbers. If she can get them all, she'll be the next president of the United States, almost certainly. But right now, there's an enthusiasm problem. It still hasn't been solved at this point in the convention. She's got to do it herself.
This may sound like a tautological answer, but I think she needs to give a memorable speech.
Yeah.
I think she needs to give a speech that, you think about, like I've been saying to this all week. I said it in Cleveland to Republicans. Tell me anything that Mitt Romney or John McCain said in their acceptance speeches. She's got to have some lines that stick with people, which Donald Trump did. The Democrats have criticized him, but he had lines that stuck with people. Can she come across with something where people say at the end of the night, wow, and then are quoting back and things that will show up in highlight reels for great convention speeches over the years?
Right, we pointed out that she's given some very good speeches, better than a lot of people expect in this campaign so far. Back in 2008, she gave a couple great speeches that had lines that she's still talking about, breaking that hardest glass ceiling. She could get there tonight if she does that.
Yep. All right, we looked at a half century of political convention history earlier today, and we could not find a single instance of a presidential nominee being introduced for their acceptance speech by one of the children. This year, though, we have not one but two such cases. Ivanka Trump, of course, delivered a well-received prelude to Donald Trump's nomination speech last week in Cleveland. Tonight, Chelsea Clinton will do the same for her mother. Chelsea's never been one of the most visible surrogates her parents have, but in an interview with NBC's Today that aired this morning, we got a little bit of a glimpse of how Chelsea might approach the job tonight and in the days ahead.
I'm going to talk as her daughter. I'm an only child, so it's a unique position that I have, and I just hope that people understand even a little more when I'm done than when I started about why I love her so much and admire her so much. What we heard last week in Cleveland, that's not the person that I know. That's not the person that I grew up with, that I'm so proud to stand beside and to introduce here in Philadelphia. I think it was clear last week when Ivanka introduced her dad that she's so proud of him. I hope it will be kind of at least as clear why I'm so proud of my mom when I introduce her. Another kind of working mom moment, yesterday I was breastfeeding Aiden and practicing with Megan, and she was giving me feedback and I was exchanging ideas. So it's been, even Aiden has contributed to the speech.
So, John, what is the best way, most effective way for Chelsea Clinton to validate her mother this evening?
Well, I alluded to it a little bit before, and I think one thing you could say is that the Trump children all gave really strong speeches in Cleveland, by everybody's estimation. What they did not do in general was lay out some one or two really telling anecdote that illustrates, instead of just telling, showing what the things are.
And that
about
has stuck with people.
That stuck with people. And so I think she could do that. She's got to, again, to illustrate what motivates her mother, why, not why she's qualified to be president of the United States, but what kind of a person she is, and make it visible to people, make it resonant and hit home.
Yeah, Ivanka Trump has been an accomplished public presenter for a while. Chelsea Clinton still has not done very much of it, even though she worked for Time for NBC News as a correspondent. She's still, her mode of communication has still surprised people. I've known her since the early 90s, I mean, watched her at least, and I'm still surprised when I hear her speak at length. Right. So I think the best thing she can do, to some extent, is to tell vivid stories and have people see her as an accomplished person and have that reflect well in her mother. So as much as just being herself, rather than anything specifically she says about her mom.
I saw her talk in this cycle down in South Carolina, where she was doing an event with a bunch of college kids. She was confronted by someone about her mother's and father's record on criminal justice, right. And she answered it with extraordinary straightforwardness, sincerity, candor, and aplomb. She was very, very, very good in that moment. It's obviously a very small room compared to this very big room, but she has it within her to be able to do that.
People still think of her, to some extent, so suspended animation as a child. Yeah. She's practically a middle-aged woman now, and so I think a lot of Americans are going to see her anew, yeah. And she's got an opportunity to validate.
Right. Ever since Donald Trump called on Russian hackers to retrieve Hillary Clinton's missing emails, the respective campaigns have been racing either to mitigate or capitalize on the fallout, depending on which side you're talking about. In the last 24 hours or so, Trump and his campaign chairman Paul Manafort gave interviews to Fox News and sang from the same hymnal as they made the case that this whole story has gotten blown way out of proportion.
First of all, he didn't encourage anybody to hack. Secondly, what he said was that the 33 illegally deleted emails are still missing, and he was making a sarcastic point about those 33,000 emails.
Of course I'm being sarcastic, and they don't even know, frankly, if it's Russia. They have no idea if it's Russia, if it's China, if it's somebody else. Who knows who it is? But you have 33,000 emails deleted, and the real problem is what was said on those emails.
So that's the Trump side trying to ameliorate. We also have the Clinton side trying to capitalize. Clinton campaign and its allies putting a lot of pressure on and trying to score points. Clinton's campaign communications director, Jim Palmieri, responded to Trump at a press conference here in Philadelphia this morning,
suggesting that a foreign country, in this case a semi-hostile state to the United States, conduct espionage against an opponent who's running for to seat the president of the United States is never, it's not sarcastic, it's never a joke, it's something that we should all take seriously.
The U.S. Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack, who was a finalist on Hillary Clinton's VP shortlist, told Iowa delegates this morning that Trump may have violated a federal law that prohibits, as he put it, quote, siding with the enemy. So, Mark, this controversy has been pretty big news for the last little more than 24 hours, but my question is, do you think that in the back and forth here, is it now behind us for the moment at least, and in the longer term, will it have any real impact on the campaign?
I think it can be set off at a moment's notice. I don't think it necessarily anything's going to happen in the next 24 hours because Hillary Clinton's speech will be such a big deal. But we don't really know what the news landscape's going to look like from basically tomorrow through Labor Day. A big gap there where there's nothing on the schedule that's particularly big. They're both going to be campaigning a lot in battleground states. Hopefully we'll get to go to the Iowa State Fair. But I think that there's so many loose ends here. Are there more emails coming? Trump's got to sit down with a serious interviewer and sort of clarify what he meant. I think you'll hear more from Republicans. Democrats are going to keep pounding on it. So I don't think it's over. And my sense is the press is so siding against Trump on this for the most part, that it still will do damage with him unless the dynamic changes.
Trump has not answered the fundamental questions. He has not full-throatedly, seriously, significantly denounced Vladimir Putin. He still says nice things about Putin.
Yeah.
He still says Putin's a better leader than Barack Obama. He has not put out his tax returns, and so therefore we don't know what his financial entanglements with Russia are. Until those things are known, if he ever does them, the press, I think, smells blood in the water here, and there are big, real questions that they want to get answers to. So it could be alive for months.
Right. But if we got more emails from the DNC,
that could, I know.
It could change the thing right back around. All right, taking a break. When we come back, the Democratic Senator from Minnesota, Amy Klobuchar, joins us after these words from our sponsors. Welcome back. We're here at the convention in Philadelphia, Wells Fargo Center. Our next guest is no stranger to the convention stage. Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota spoke earlier, and she's speaking again tonight as part of the powerhouse group of Democratic female senators who, you guys kind of travel in a pack. You're like a girl gang.
We're like the sisterhood of the traveling pantsuits.
Yeah.
But yes, and as you know, Secretary Clinton used to be a woman senator, and she used to be part of our group. And so this is going to be a big part of our presentation tonight. It's going to be talking about some personal stories. People have actually worked with her.
Yes.
So I'm not going to ask you to let the cat out of the bag and tell those stories, but what will those stories illustrate?
They'll show her leadership and also her humanity. My story is about when the Haiti earthquake happened back in 2010. Rubble, chaos, 160,000 people dead. And Minnesota moms were on the ground. They had finished adoptions, but all the paperwork was lost. And they called me, and I called the only person I knew it would help. It was Hillary Clinton, and she didn't pawn it off. She got it done. And the next day, those babies and their moms were in a car on the way to the airport. And I've met these kids since they've grown up, and I don't think they're going to ever know what she did for them, and that's a leader.
I don't think there's any doubt that she'll do at least pretty well tonight, and she could do extraordinarily well. Does it matter? Does it matter how good her speech is tonight for her chances of winning?
I think it does matter because you've seen this kind of build up with some tremendous speeches this week from Michelle Obama and Barack Obama and, of course, Joe Biden, President Clinton. I'm not going to name everyone, but there's been this build up. And she's going to be compared to Donald Trump, who spoke, as you know, 76 minutes, pretty angry speech, pretty angry crowd out there. And now this is her chance to show something different, and I think you're going to see a little more humanity, and I think you're going to see a little more detail on policy and issues as you've seen this entire week. Instead of people chanting lock her up at the Democratic convention, they were chanting love Trump's hate. So it has been a different atmosphere here, and you've also seen people like Mayor Bloomberg, people with business backgrounds. You're going to see military people today talk about her ability to be a strong commander-in-chief.
There were a few Democrats earlier this week chanting lock her up, and it actually leads me to the question I want to ask. This convention has obviously tried to make people in America more familiar with some of Hillary Clinton's attractive human attributes and introduce her in some ways, even though she's a very familiar figure. Her biggest problem right now in polling is her trustworthiness. There are a lot of people who don't trust her. Has this convention done anything to help that?
Well, I think it has. I mean, probably the commander-in-chief last night when he talked about the fact so heartfelt that she has been in the arena, that she may not be perfect, but when you're in the arena, you piss people off from time to time, you make mistakes, and he talked about the fact, and this is really my favorite part for anyone that's in politics right now, that it's not a spectator sport. You just can't stand on the sidelines and complain, and the fact that she's been in there getting things done and that he trusts her, and I bet you the thing that people will remember the most when he said she's more qualified than I was, she's more qualified than Bill, she's the most qualified person to ever run for president.
Your delegation's got a lot of Bernie supporters in it, Bernie delegates, and although things aren't like they were Monday and part of Tuesday in the hall, around town you still hear Bernie people, a lot of young people chanting pretty negative things about her. Where do the people from your state, the Bernie people from Minnesota, stand now? What's their sort of mood as they approach the last night and prepare to leave town?
We have had an incredibly positive mood in our delegation. We worked really hard. Maybe we're a caucus state and we're kind of used to this. We're used to some protests. Nothing's always rosy. But Keith Ellison, who introduced Bernie as a congressman from our state, we announced our delegate count together. And we both worked really hard to make sure that we come together. And I think you'll see that. Saw that in our delegation. Of course, you're going to get people yelling here and there. It's a convention. It's the Democratic Party. But I think overall, this notion that people that want to do something about climate change are going to go support a guy that says it's a hoax perpetrated by the Chinese, or someone that wants to do more with diplomacy is going to go over and support a guy that just said that basically told Russia to engage in espionage. I mean, this doesn't feel like the Bernie supporters to me.
One of the things that she obviously wants to do, needs to do, is to fire up the members of the Obama coalition and get them to come out for her in large numbers. Do you sense that there's obviously going to be a lot of Democrats who are scared of Donald Trump and will turn out because they're scared of Donald Trump? Do you think there is now new reasons for them to be enthused for Hillary Clinton per se that they've learned about this week?
Yeah, I think, first of all, you've seen some really exciting moments with icons coming out there, John Lewis and others that have come out and spoke and really talked from the heart about knowing her. Joe Biden's incredible speech yesterday. I'm not as concerned about that. I know the immigrant population is just about, they are fired up and ready to go, to use an Obama phrase. There's just a lot of people on our base. I think one of the things that you've seen this week that maybe surprises you when the whole focus has been on the Bernie people is there been outreach to independent voters. Tim Kaine did it last night with his suburban dad stories. You certainly saw Mayor Bloomberg do it when he talked about this isn't a reality TV show, this is reality, and he talked about building a business and what that takes, and just this some focus on the debt. You don't always hear that at every Democratic convention, so that's what I've truly appreciated is the fact that it just hasn't been about base building.
All right, the woman some call Senator Klobuchar, we call Klobuchar 2028.
Oh, stop.
Senator, thank you.
Good to be on with both of you. Have a great night.
Coming up, it's the most important meal of the day. What we learned today over breakfast with two Democratic governors right after this.
Welcome back to the Democratic National Convention site here in Philadelphia at our final Bloomberg Politics Convention breakfast hosted by Al Hunt this morning. Our honored guests were Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper, a surprising late addition to Hillary Clinton's potential running mate list, and the former Pennsylvania Governor Ed Rendell, a straight-talking and loyal longtime Clinton supporter. Both of these guys talked about this convention, inter-party politics, and the state of the general election in their respective battleground states.
Governor, can you think of an issue on which Hillary Clinton's challenging Democratic Party orthodoxy and saying to the party we need to be more of a centrist party on this issue?
Oh my gosh, when
her husband ran in '92, he was for right to work, welfare reform, NAFTA, death penalty. Said the party we need to move more to the center. Most every issue on which he's staked out a position that's different or challenged, it's been to move to the left. I'm just wondering if you can think of anything where she said, as her husband did when he ran, on this issue, we need to be more of a centrist party.
I don't have to think about it. I mean, that's the kind of access to my memory vault that is harder when I've had 4.5 hours of sleep.
The party is more liberal than it was in 1992 and in 2000.
You're telling me?
Yeah. What do you think's contributed to that? Is it the economic conditions?
I grew up in the 60s, and the Democratic Party had a very liberal arm back then. And I think that I guess you call it a liberal wing, has never gone away. But it certainly in the last few years, it has expanded and grown new life. And I think part of that is this economic dislocation. I think that frustration that people have with losing their careers, they look back and they were making more money 10 years ago than they are now. Their dreams of what they were going to get in their life has changed so dramatically. I think that's part of what pushes many Democrats to be more idealistic. I think President Obama is, again, the great turnout, but there's a portion of Colorado, its approval rating's back up over 50% now. And so he would be very good. And I think Bernie Sanders, you're right, would be a huge, again, for a lot of those Democrats to get them fired up and turn out both.
Actually, I want Sarah Silverman. I think that may have been the turning point in the whole convention. Because no politician could get away with saying, you guys are ridiculous. If you're planning the campaign, there's no one surrogate you want out. In this area, you want President Obama as many times as we can get him. Interestingly, in 12, he hardly came into Pennsylvania at all. We had to beg him to come in for one event in Pittsburgh at the end. And David Plouffe, I saw, was interviewed, and he said, Pennsylvania, we always hear it's going to be trouble, it's going to be tough. And McCain and Palin lived in Pennsylvania. Romney spent a ton of time in Pennsylvania. We could hardly get our guys in. And he said, Plouffe said, Ed Rendell will say it's close, but it never is. But one of these days, I hear everyone break down the polls. And Donald Trump's getting 15% of the Latino vote. In the two Quinnipiac polls, he got 0 African-American votes in Pennsylvania and Ohio. He's getting clobbered among women. He's losing college-age white men by 10 points. And somebody, please tell me how he's even or within the margin of error. It doesn't seem to be possible. Can you figure it out?
Totally agree.
I can't figure it out. It doesn't make, everything I know about politics doesn't make any sense.
So, Mark, you now had a running conversation with almost everybody you talked to this week about, can you figure out some way? One of the things that Hillary Clinton is taking on the party orthodoxy on. Hickenlooper, you asked him, he was as stumped as Joel Benenson was the other day. What do you think about that?
It's incredible how much the party's moved to the left. And what's going to be fascinating is if Hillary Clinton's elected president, where are the new Democrats? Because so many of her advisors, so many of, including Bill Clinton, so many of the people in the orbit now to the intellectual conversation of the Democratic Party are still relatively conservative as compared to the kind of position she and Bernie Sanders staked out in this race.
It will be very interesting to see, because that's certainly true. And certainly if you talk about the people that are kitchen cabinet level, senior people, they are still old new Democrats.
Gene Sperling, who played a role last night.
Tom Nides, people like that.
And if Paul Ryan is the Speaker of the House, which there's almost no Democrat who will tell you he won't be regardless of the outcome of the presidential race, the only way to make deals with Paul Ryan will be to do things that would cause massive uproar at this convention if she said them from the podium.
At some point, we will have a long discussion of how it is that Ed Rendell and David Plouffe see Pennsylvania so differently. Could not be starker, but we don't have time for that right now. So we'll just thank Mr. Rendell, Governor Rendell, and John Hickenlooper for being at our breakfast. Up next, we have the Reverend Jesse Jackson joining us here on this set. We'll be right back with that.
We're here live, Democratic Convention in the Wells Fargo Center in Philadelphia, the early parts of the fourth and final day of this convention. Congressman Emanuel Cleaver of Missouri just finished, and they're playing a video now. Lots of speakers leading up to Hillary Clinton's big speech tonight. Here to preview that speech, talk about the convention, a former presidential candidate, civil rights leader, founder of the Rainbow Push Coalition, and a longtime friend, associate, and occasionally rival of the Clintons, Jesse Jackson. Reverend Jackson, welcome. It's your first time on this show, so we're happy to have you here this auspicious day.
I feel honored.
You're nice to come. You've known the Clintons for a long time. I first met you in 1992 when Bill Clinton was running for president, and you and he had I'd say, a times contentious relationship. Let's talk about your history with the Clintons and how you've watched them over the years become the first family of the Democratic Party.
You know, I met Hillary many years ago working in the Delta of Arkansas in Mississippi doing free legal work. That kind of stood out. Then pulling together blacks and whites in Arkansas and the Deep South, that kind of reaching out. Then I watched her grow with the Little Rock Nine, Erna Green in that group. And then the White House, the health care. So I watched her grow. And Bill always had this sensitivity of kind of Southern folklore, kind of black and white. He could talk Oxford talk and then blow the saxophone voice in. Bill could kind of do it all.
Yeah.
So I watched them grow, and of course Bill's record as president was seen as successful, and he has never stopped working.
One of the things that was true back in the time that Mark was referring to was, you were clearly on the liberal end of the spectrum. Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton were modernizers. They were more of a centrist, the DLC. Do you think now, when you look at Hillary Clinton, this is a question that progressives all have, is she really a progressive now? Is that where is she gone with where the party is? Or is she still a closet DLC person?
Well, you call Democrats of the leisure class, by the way.
The tension was that they were trying to get the white vote that Reagan had. And they went back, they couldn't get it. We were trying to get the students and people we never had. The Rainbow outlasted DLC. And so while he tried to govern as DLC, his new votes came from
the rainbow. Matter of fact, in '86, Democrats regained the Democratic Senate majority. Graham in Florida and Sanford in North Carolina and Brewer in Louisiana, because blacks in the South who had not been registered by Democrats or Labor voted in big numbers for the first time. So I think Hillary's had a wake-up call to the Bernie campaign, because the new generation of voters and voter demands that cannot be ignored, and I think she's made an adjustment.
Right. You think she's a genuine, she's no longer a DLC New Democrat. You think she's a Democrat of a rainbow push kind of Democrat.
Well, let's define that in the sense that supporting affordable health care is the moral center. That's not left. A commitment now to radically reduce student loan debt, which is as opposed to making education a commodity. That's a concession. Banks, she wanted to trust the banks with removing Glass-Steagall. They proved to be untrustworthy. So there'll be much more strength at hearings to make banks be more accountable. That's an accommodation. Her commitment to enforce the Voting Rights Act. I mean, things that she has done to accommodate, to me, represents growth and acceptance of a new reality.
My guess is you and Donald Trump have known each other over the years. Is that right?
Over a long period of time.
Yeah. Tell me your best Donald Trump story.
We're going to different boxing matches, and Donald with Tyson and Don King and Sugar Ray Leonard. He was that kind of affable guy. Then we did the Rainbow Push Wall Street project at the World Trade Center. Mm-hmm. And when we began to try to open up Wall Street for blacks and Latinos to do business, he gave us office space for a year. He was that kind of guy.
So helping you with that project, hanging out with him at boxing matches, my guess is before this race, you thought he was like a pretty fun guy to be around,
affable
right?
And social. Yeah. And then the first signal was he was going on a limb on the birther movement.
A pretty big signal.
a signal that that he was trying to challenge the legitimacy of President Obama.
Yeah.
And it just kept going further over that. And now he's gone from that to he will kill affordable health care, which affects 30 million people. He will not support raising wages for working people. And his foreign policy is foreign to anything that's rational. The idea of destabilizing NATO, which makes the glands of Putin salivate. So he says, on the one hand, Hillary can't say radical Islam. He can't say anything unkind or challenging about Putin, which is suggestive. The idea of deporting 15 million people, it just can't be done. Building 2,000 miles of border with Mexico, we share 2,000 miles, but also we do more trade with Mexico on a given day than we do with Japan and China. So these ideas are not just conservative, they're somewhat way off the main line. They could destabilize the country.
Sounds like you want to debate him.
Right.
Well, I'm anxious to, in the extent to which, and that's, I think, why Bloomberg last night felt the need to say the extent to which I have some credibility. Hear me, this guy's ideas about Europe and America are dangerous.
A lot of Democrats that I know and that we all hear from think that Donald Trump is a stone-cold racist. Do you agree with that?
I don't want to go into the branding. I think that is unfortunate this race has come down to branding. He calls her crooked. What really matters is it's almost childish to be branded. He is the Republican Party's face. And if we lose, he would win and be America's president. And so labeling him at this point is just another headline. What does he stand on? Affordable health care and race disparity and poverty. In this city, for example, 500,000 people here are functionally illiterate. 400,000 have jail records. In this city, unemployment for whites is 3%, for blacks is 12%. In this state, Pennsylvania state, blacks 5%, state Penn, blacks 49%. That's real stuff. Chicago, 100,000 vacant homes, abandoned lots, Detroit. So we need to think. I thought he would have been running on his ability to deal and reconstruct. Right. He's gotten sidetracked into becoming a kind of comedian. I think that's beneath his capacity.
Down on the stage raft speaking, someone named Sarah McBride, the first openly transgender person to speak at either party's convention. Could a transgender person have spoken at Bill Clinton's convention in 1992?
Maybe not in 92, but we're growing. I think I went downstairs a few minutes ago to a bathroom, a toilet, where men and women were in the same toilet.
Right.
It was a little culture shock.
Yeah.
But you know, it was civil, and so I think all of us are growing to some extent.
Is the Democratic Party changing faster than the country, or leading the way, or?
Bernie took us to another level because when we first got the right to vote in 65, blacks couldn't vote. white women couldn't serve on juries, 18-year-olds couldn't vote, they couldn't vote bilingually, they couldn't vote on campuses. And for a while, it didn't vote. Now that it is voting, there's a new reality of the energy in the markets coming from those who historically locked out. So women, when Hillary breaks the glass ceiling, it's not just her breaking the glass ceiling, the pay equity for women.
A lot of changes.
That's a lot of changes taking place. So they'll either ride the tide or the tide will take them out. But I think Hillary has made that adjustment. And I also think that there are people who will be working on accountability beyond the election.
Reverend Jackson, thank you. Really good to have you here. Hope you come back a lot this year.
You're the man.
Thank you. Come back. More talk about Hillary Clinton's big speech tonight with two women who know her quite well. And if you're watching us in Washington, D.C., you can now listen to us on the radio. It's Bloomberg 99.1 FM in the District of Columbia. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to Philadelphia as we wait for Hillary Clinton's nomination acceptance speech tonight. We're joined now by Lisa Caputo, who more than 2 decades ago served as the press secretary for Hillary Clinton when she was First Lady, and also with us, Stephanie Shriak, president of Emily's List. Ladies, it's great to have you here. We were just talking about your view that this convention is working.
Yeah,
Why so?
It's working. It's just it's a well-run convention. It's well-produced. A lot of content, a lot of well-produced videos, great feeling inside the hall, a lot of enthusiasm. It's jammed, actually. You walk in and out of suites, it's just jammed. And I think there's just a positive feeling here.
Well, and I think I couldn't agree more. And it is so the difference between last week's lack of quality speakers, I'm just going to say it, just the lack of presence of a lot of Republican leaders, and the difference of this week and how it's built up. I mean, to have First Lady or Obama kick this off on Monday, and you could literally feel the room shift to a different place. And then I thought Bill Clinton was fabulous on Tuesday, and then last night, holy cow, between Bloomberg and Kaine and Biden and the president, it's just building up perfectly, and it's really a sign of just where the Democrats are in this election this year.
I was just going to say, I really got to say, I think the Mike Bloomberg speech was really something for the history books. that was quite a speech. I thought that he went right at it, and I wasn't quite sure what he was going to do, and I think he was incredibly well received in the hall, and it was a very bold thing for him to do.
And for her to do. Just talk about a woman you love, have known for a long time, respect, becoming the nominee of the party and the first woman nominee of either party. Talk about how that makes you feel.
I gotta tell you, I came into this week. I've worked on a lot of Democratic campaigns over the years. I've been running Emily's List for 6 years, but I admit it, I am one of those young women who came up after the big movement. I felt like the doors were open. I probably just took it for granted. I'm gonna admit it, I took it for granted. I have to say, every day this week, I've gotten more and more excited. I can feel it in my gut. I walk around, our membership of Emily's List is beside themselves. There has been this just energy just building, ready to come out. And I think what you're going to see tonight when Hillary Clinton accepts this nomination is a release of emotion that I think folks have been wondering if it's going to happen. I'm telling you, it is going to happen. I can see the women and men, by the way. It's not just women and men who have been waiting for this moment, some for decades and decades.
I just asked Reverend Jackson whether he thought that Donald Trump was a racist. A lot of people in the Democratic Party do. Do you think Donald Trump's a misogynist?
I'm not gonna. There's like no use in me answering that question because I really don't. I don't want to talk about Donald Trump. I really don't think it's constructive. I'd rather have a debate on the issues and on the merits. And to Stephanie's point, you asked the question, how do you feel about Hillary Clinton accepting the nomination? Obviously, for me, this is very personal. Very personal as somebody who worked for her for a really long time. Still do to some extent. Once you're a member of the Clinton family, you never leave. And as a woman, it's a transformational feeling I have personally. A long time ago, when I first went to work for Hillary Clinton, you both will remember Susan Thomas's, very close friend of Hillary Clinton's, a wonderful lawyer in her own right. And Susan interviewed me for the job to be Hillary's press secretary in the campaign in '92, and she said, she is the Clinton who could be president someday if this doesn't work out. It was just very interesting, very poignant.
I asked the question about Trump's attitude towards women because it's part of its features in some of the messaging from the campaign. It features some of the advertising, and it is an interesting thing if you believe that's true of Trump, that he's running against the first woman female nominee. So raises the stakes for a lot of women in this hall. Are you one of them? Where you feel that contrast is important to understand?
Elections are about contrast. The elections are about choices, and we are, in fact, as Democrats, running against a man whose rhetoric is outrageous. It is sexist rhetoric. It is misogynistic rhetoric. I can't speak to who he is as a person, but his inflammatory language is really very offensive, and it really talks about who he is as a set of values and ultimately what the Republican Party is, making this choice and embracing this set of values. And I just don't feel like it's not how I was raised. I think about my mother every time I hear him, and she's no longer with us, but I can just hear her going, you just are not supposed to say those things, and there's a reason for that. And this election is about what kind of country we want to be in a really, really fundamental way. Are we about being stronger together, about civility, about common sense solutions, about a forward-moving vision, or are we a divisive, dangerous, just dividing our communities up? And this is the choice in front of us, and I think it's really important for folks to understand what the stakes are in this election.
I think values will be discussed tonight. Chelsea Clinton's going to introduce her mother and the grandmother of her children, and I think we heard a lot about values yesterday from President Obama and Vice President Biden, and I think you're going to hear a lot about what are Hillary Clinton's values tonight from her daughter, and then in her speech specifically, she'll talk about her own values, her experiences, people who have touched her life, and how that's molded her thinking and her experiences and her accomplishments throughout her career.
It's going to be great. It is going to be great.
Lisa Caputo, Stephanie Shriak, I have a lot more I'd like to ask you, but they're telling me we're out of time. Thank you both. When we come back, Andrew Mitchell and Alex Wagner right after these words from our sponsors.
President.
White House.
A commander-in-chief.
A friend.
Knowledgeable.
President.
Some Democrats here, as everyone in Philadelphia awaits Hillary Clinton's big acceptance speech tonight when she accepts the Democratic nomination. Until then, we have the next best thing to Hillary Clinton. NBC News, All Everything, Andrea Mitchell, and senior editor of The Atlantic, Alex Wagner. Andrea, you've covered Hillary Clinton a long time. How is this convention done in trying to address some of the challenges that she faces with the electorate, do you think, so far?
Well, there's good news and bad news. I think the speeches have been terrific in terms of validating her, vouching for her. They've been so good that it raises the bar. And now, how does she live up to it? How does she do better than Michelle Obama? I don't know if you agree with me, but I thought the president gave her the most generous, enthusiastic, really embracing endorsement. No one could ask for anything more than what Barack Obama said about
her. Do you agree with that?
So I thought the moments from last night were both rhetorical and actual. The speech itself and then that embrace between the president and Secretary Clinton. First of all, it's a long time coming, but the emotion, the warmth, the tenderness almost in that was something that would have been unimaginable.
They melted into each other's arms.
They did. They almost, I thought they were going to kiss at a certain point. Yeah. Not really, but I think it meant a lot, especially against the backdrop of a fractious kind of Democratic Party and questions about how loud Bernie Sanders supporters are going to be tonight.
Now, I want you both to do something that will be very hard for each of you. Imagine yourself as a Bernie Sanders supporter. And whether by the end of this, what you've heard throughout this convention, including Bernie Sanders' endorsement, are you at the end of this convention now like ready for Hillary?
I think a lot of them are not there. I mean, we saw even that rather silly protest against Panetta and another against Mike Bloomberg, which was organized but had no intellectual connection to what either were saying. And they're not thinking, I mean, they're right to be suspicious because I think what Terry McAuliffe said the other day certainly sowed new seeds of suspicion about whether or not she's going to back down on TPP and call it by another name if she's elected. That said, I think that the personal endorsements have been so meaningful and so direct, and I think the production values here have been just terrific.
I talked to a bunch of Sanders supporters and wrote about this for The Atlantic this morning. And I think there's now sort of some backlash among young Sanders supporters who are tired of people in the media especially saying, you guys are nihilists. And a lot of them have said, look, we still have a lot of ardor in our hearts for Bernie Sanders, but at the end of the day, we understand how the institution works. And we will eventually get on board. Does it mean we're going to be wearing I'm with her t-shirts by Thursday? No. But in the long run, before November, they will get to yes.
I will say, getting off the train to come here tonight, there were some Sanders supporters on the platform chanting, draft Chelsea first. That's
good luck to them on that.
That's a kind of a first date chant. Yeah, she's like 40. I don't think we're drafting 40-year-olds of either gender. Going forward from here, they're doing a bus trip. You're familiar with Clinton bus trips out of the convention. Is this a self-conscious, specific, explicit attempt to recapture the Clinton-Gore bus magic?
Absolutely. This is sentimental. It's strategic. And it's also very personal with her. They remember, those were the days when the Clintons and the Gores got along with each other and amongst themselves. I mean, it was the buddy movie. It was the road trip. For us as reporters, it was so unstructured. There was so much access. It was my favorite time in politics because unlike previous campaigns, we were not getting on and off airplanes and going to airport rallies. You know, this was really as spontaneous as I've ever seen a campaign. Bill Clinton would stop on the road in Iowa if he saw 10 guys coming out of a bar at closing time.
You're a student of body language. Are they a good team? Is there magic there?
A student of body language.
Kane and Clinton?
I guess. I mean, I think Tim Kaine it's sort of like who can be in the White House with Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton, sort of say yes when needed and, you know, be a utility player when necessary. I am not sure it's because of some sort of alchemical like magic they have together.
I would just say I was in Miami for the rollout. The speech last night must have been disappointing to a lot of his fans. Yeah. But he was so authentic and there was such a real, bond that came on that stage last Saturday in Miami. I think that it could work.
Okay. I think it could work too. Andrea Mitchell, Alex Wagner, thank you both. Enjoy tonight's historical event. We'll be right back.
So head on over to BloombergPolitics.com right now and check out Reed John's latest piece on why young women are not so excited about Hillary Clinton's latest crack in the glass ceiling. We'll have complete coverage from our team here in Philadelphia on the site throughout this historic night. Coming up on the television, Bloomberg West. Until tomorrow.
They're rocking and rolling here in Philadelphia. It's like American Bandstand.
Tomorrow, you know,
Dick Clark.
Hillary Clinton will be the nominee.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that tomorrow. Until then, we say to you, sayonara.
I'm Mark Crumpton. You're watching Bloomberg West. Let's begin with a check of your first word news. Hillary Clinton is on the cusp of history on the fourth and final